A girl helps a lost kitten, misses her interview. Turns out he's the CEO's cat and changes her life. Sarah Martinez sat cross-legged on the edge of her tiny apartment bed, ironing her only professional blazer for the third time. The steam from the iron rose in a small, swirling cloud, fogging her glasses slightly. She paused, lifted her frames to rub the lenses clean, and took a deep breath. Today was the day, the most important day of her life, her big interview at Sterling Communications. She glanced at the clock on her phone. 6:43 a.m.,
Plenty of time.
she whispered, though her stomach had other ideas. The tight knot of nerves twisted and churned, refusing to be ignored. Sterling Communications was one of the most prestigious advertising agencies in the city, and this was the break she'd been praying for. After 4 months of endless job applications, polite rejections, and interviews that went nowhere, today felt like a glimmer of hope, a golden ticket she couldn't afford to miss.
Okay, focus.
Sarah said aloud, straightening her back. She carefully slipped the freshly pressed blazer onto a hanger and inspected her outfit for the day. A crisp white blouse, sleek black slacks, and practical black pumps. Not exactly cutting-edge fashion, but polished enough to project professionalism. She pulled her dark brown hair into a tidy bun, staring at herself in the mirror.
You've got this.
She muttered, trying to smile. Her reflection didn't seem convinced. Her mind wandered as she grabbed a bowl of cereal and plopped down at her wobbly kitchen table. This job wasn't just another step, it was the step. Landing a position at Sterling Communications would mean so much more than just a paycheck. It was her shot at proving to herself and to everyone else that the sacrifices she'd made had been worth it. The sleepless nights studying marketing theories, the part-time jobs she juggled to pay for college, and more recently, the soul-crushing string of rejection emails that always began with, "We regret to inform you." She shook off the thought and checked her phone again. 7:12 a.m. She had time for breakfast, but just barely. She scarfed down the last bite of cereal, reaching for the coffee pot on the counter, only to knock her mug clean off the table. It shattered against the floor with a sharp crack, splashing coffee in a dark brown arc across her kitchen tiles.
Really?
Sarah groaned, scrambling for a towel. Her heart pounded. The day hadn't even properly started, and already she was losing control. After a hasty cleanup, she stuffed her portfolio and resume into a sleek black messenger bag, slipped on her blazer, and headed out the door. Outside, the January air was cold and biting, making her cheeks sting as she walked briskly to the subway station. Her heels clicked against the pavement, echoing loudly in the early morning quiet. The subway platform was unusually crowded for a Tuesday morning, and Sarah tapped her foot impatiently, clutching the strap of her bag. Her breath was visible in the frigid air as she glanced down at her watch. 7:40 a.m. She still had time to get to Sterling Communications, but only if the train came soon. When it finally screeched into the station, Sarah squeezed into the crowded car, finding herself wedged between a man with a too large backpack and a woman loudly reciting her grocery list into her phone. She held onto the overhead rail for balance, her bag pressed tightly against her hip. As the train lurched forward, Sarah ran through her mental checklist for the interview.
Don't ramble. Smile. Make eye contact. Mention that campaign you loved. The eco-friendly one with the billboards. And breathe. Don't forget to breathe.
The train slowed to a halt a few stops later, and Sarah stepped off, joining the flood of commuters heading toward the exit. She checked her phone. 8:05 a.m. Her interview was at 8:30. If she walked quickly, she'd make it with time to spare. Relief washed over her as she merged into the crowd on the bustling city sidewalk. The office building was only a few blocks away now. She could practically see herself walking into the sleek lobby, confidently introducing herself to the receptionist, shaking hands with the hiring manager. It all felt so close, just within reach. But the gnawing anxiety in her stomach wouldn't quite disappear. What if something went wrong? What if she stumbled over her words? What if they asked her a question she couldn't answer?
Stop it, Sarah.
She muttered under her breath.
You're prepared. You're ready.
Just as she turned a corner, a bicyclist whizzed by, startling her and causing her to jolt sideways. Her bag slipped off her shoulder, and the papers inside it nearly spilled out.
Watch it!
She called after the cyclist, who didn't bother looking back. She reslung the bag across her body, her heart racing from the near collision. As she regained her composure, she spotted the sleek glass exterior of Sterling Communications building looming ahead. Her pace quickened, her nerves buzzing.
Almost there.
She thought, clutching the strap of her bag. This was it, her moment. She wasn't going to let anything stop her now. Sarah stepped off the curb into the chaotic hum of the city streets, her breath curling into the cold morning air like wisps of smoke. The world around her was alive with motion, honking cars jockeying for position, bus brakes screeching in protest, and the hurried footsteps of fellow commuters tapping out a staccato rhythm on the concrete. The sun, still low in the winter sky, cast a pale golden glow over the bustling avenue, but the icy wind slicing through her blazer reminded her that warmth was still a distant hope. She gripped the strap of her messenger bag tightly, her pulse quickening with each step. Her focus was sharp, the Sterling Communications office building a beacon ahead of her. She stole a glance at her phone, 8:11 a.m. She was cutting it close but still had enough time to make it. The thought steadied her nerves and she adjusted her pace, dodging around a couple carrying oversized coffee cups and a teenager glued to their phone.
Just a few more blocks.
Sarah muttered under her breath, her breathless words barely audible over the urban symphony of engines, voices, and rustling coats. She rehearsed her opening line for the interview, her inner voice alternating between pep talks and stern reminders.
You've worked for this. You've earned this. Don't mess it up.
But as she reached the intersection at 7th and Main, a sound slipped through the chaotic orchestra of the city. A faint, high-pitched cry that stopped her in her tracks. It was so soft she almost missed it. A delicate, pitiful meow that seemed at odds with the mechanical roar of the world around her. Sarah's brow furrowed. She turned her head toward the noise, straining to hear it again. A gust of wind whipped past her, carrying with it a stronger, clearer cry. Her eyes scanned the area until they landed on a small figure crouched beside the curb, just under the edge of a parked car. It was a kitten. Its orange fur stood out against the grimy asphalt, its tiny body trembling as it let out another faint meow. One paw was lifted awkwardly off the ground, and it limped forward slightly before retreating, frightened as a car roared by. Sarah's heart sank. For a moment, all she could do was stand there, frozen. The crowd around her surged forward, oblivious to the tiny creature in need. A man in a navy coat brushed past her, muttering a hurried apology. The pedestrian signal ticked down from 15 seconds. Sarah looked back at the kitten. It was so small, so vulnerable, and so impossibly close to the busy intersection. Her rational mind kicked in.
You can't stop now, it argued. The interview is in less than 20 minutes. If you're late, you'll ruin your chances.
But her eyes remained fixed on the kitten. It had retreated further under the car now, its injured paw still raised. Another tiny meow escaped it, more desperate this time. Sarah's stomach tightened. The city had taught her to keep moving, to stay focused, to prioritize her goals. But right now she couldn't seem to follow those rules. The thought of leaving the kitten here, injured, terrified, and completely alone, was unbearable.
Someone else will help,
She reasoned. But as she glanced around, she saw no signs of help coming. The crowd was too busy rushing past, their heads down, their eyes fixed on their phones or the pavement ahead. She felt a pang of guilt. The pedestrian signal turned red, and the flow of foot traffic halted. Sarah took a deep breath. She knew time was slipping away. If she didn't leave now, she'd risk being late for her interview, or missing it altogether. But her feet refused to move forward. Instead, she stepped closer to the car, leaning down slightly to get a better look at the kitten. Its wide, frightened eyes met hers, and she felt a jolt of emotion she couldn't quite name.
It's just a kitten.
A voice in her head whispered,
You can't sacrifice everything for this.
but another voice, softer yet stronger, spoke up.
If you don't help, who will?
The clock was ticking. Her chest tightened as the stakes loomed in her mind. She thought of the months she'd spent waiting for this opportunity, the countless rejections she'd endured, the crushing weight of her student loans. Sterling Communications was supposed to be her fresh start, her ticket to a career she could be proud of. Walking away from this interview would be throwing all of that away. And yet, looking at the kitten, shivering, limping, so helpless, it felt like walking away would mean throwing away something even bigger. A horn blared behind her, jolting her out of her thoughts. The light turned green, and cars began inching forward, too close to the kitten's hiding spot for comfort. Her decision was made. Without another thought, Sarah darted toward the parked car, lowering herself carefully onto her knees. The cold from the asphalt seeped through the fabric of her black slacks as she crouched down, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. The kitten let out a frightened squeak, retreating further under the car.
It's okay.
Sarah whispered, her voice gentle but trembling.
I'm not going to hurt you. I promise.
She reached out a hand slowly, her movements deliberate, trying not to scare the tiny creature any more than it already was. The kitten hesitated, its wide eyes watching her warily.
Come on.
She coaxed softly.
It's okay. You're safe now.
The kitten didn't move, its tiny body pressed against the cold pavement, as though trying to disappear. Sarah glanced at her watch. 8:18 a.m. She felt a pang of panic. Every second she spent here brought her closer to missing the interview. But right now, none of that mattered. All she cared about was helping the kitten. She shifted slightly on her knees, her blazer brushing against the pavement, as she leaned further under the car. Sarah cradled the trembling kitten against her chest, wrapping her scarf securely around its tiny, fragile body. The kitten let out a small, weak meow as she hurried down the sidewalk, her arms stiff from holding it so close to keep it warm. Its fur was matted with dirt, and she could feel the sharpness of its tiny bones beneath her fingers, a heartbreaking reminder of how vulnerable it was. The cold wind stung her cheeks, and her breath came in short, foggy bursts as she scanned the street for a cab. The Sterling Communications building was only a few blocks away now, its sleek glass facade glinting in the distance like a cruel reminder of the opportunity she was throwing away.
You don't have time for this.
Logically, the rational part of her mind screamed,
You can still make it to the interview if you just put him down and walk away.
but as the kitten nuzzled weakly into her scarf, letting out another pitiful cry, Sarah's resolve hardened.
I couldn't just leave you there.
She murmured as much to herself as to the kitten. At last, a cab approached, and Sarah waved it down, practically diving into the back seat. The driver, a middle-aged man with a thick accent, glanced at her curiously in the rearview mirror as she climbed in, clutching the small bundle.
Where to?
He asked.
Closest veterinary clinic, please.
Sarah said, her voice trembling. She quickly searched on her phone, pulling up the nearest location. The driver gave her an odd look but said nothing, merging into traffic. Sarah glanced at her watch. 8:21 a.m. Her stomach dropped. Even if she ran all the way to Sterling Communications after this, she'd be at least 15 minutes late. She clenched her jaw, trying to silence the creeping panic.
You're doing the right thing.
She reminded herself.
This little guy needs you.
The cab screeched to a halt outside a small veterinary clinic. Sarah handed the driver a crumpled $20 bill, muttering a rushed,
Thank you.
before bolting out of the car with the kitten still nestled in her arms. Inside, the clinic was quiet, save for the soft murmur of conversation between a receptionist and a man holding a terrier on a leash. Sarah hurried to the desk, her heart pounding.
I found this kitten. He's hurt.
She blurted, her words tumbling out in a rush.
I think his paw might be sprained. Can someone please look at him?
The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes and a calming presence, nodded immediately.
Of course. Let me get a vet.
Within minutes, Sarah was ushered into an examination room where a veterinarian, a tall woman with a soothing voice, gently took the kitten from her arms.
Looks like he's been through a lot.
The vet said as she carefully unwrapped the scarf. The kitten meowed softly, flinching as the vet examined its paw.
He's got a sprain, poor thing, but nothing's broken. We'll clean him up, give him some pain medication, and bandage that paw.
Relief washed over Sarah, though her body remained tense.
Thank you.
She said, her voice barely above a whisper.
Does he belong to you?
The vet asked. Sarah hesitated, shaking her head.
Number I found him under a parked car. He doesn't have a collar, and I don't know if he has an owner.
The vet nodded.
We'll check for a microchip just in case.
The minutes stretched on as the kitten was treated. Sarah sat in the corner of the room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She glanced at her phone, the screen glaring back at her. 8:37 a.m. Her throat tightened. The interview was over. For a moment, she felt the weight of her choice pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She imagined the hiring manager at Sterling Communications glancing at his watch, shaking his head, moving on to the next candidate. She imagined the rejection email that would follow, another dream slipping through her fingers. But then she looked at the kitten, now cleaned and resting in a small crate, with his paw neatly bandaged. His eyes were closed, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady breaths.
I couldn't live with myself if I left him there.
She whispered, the words catching in her throat, and she meant it. The vet returned, shaking her head.
No microchip.
She said,
If no one claims him, you could always take him to a shelter, or keep him yourself.
Sarah forced a small smile.
I'll do what I can to find his owner.
She thanked the staff, paid the clinic fee with her dwindling savings, and left with the kitten still tucked securely in her scarf. By the time Sarah stepped out into the chilly afternoon air, she felt like she'd been running on fumes for hours. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the morning had faded, leaving her exhausted and emotionally drained. The kitten, now nestled snugly in a small cardboard carrier the clinic had provided, let out a contented purr. Sarah glanced down at him, managing a tired smile.
At least one of us had a good day.
She murmured. Her feet carried her home almost automatically, her mind too foggy to focus on anything other than the growing pit in her stomach. She tried not to think about the interview she'd missed, but the thought crept in anyway, sharp and unrelenting.
Maybe they would have hired me.
She thought bitterly.
Maybe this was my shot, and I blew it.
When she reached her apartment, she set the kitten's carrier down gently on the kitchen table. He meowed in protest, pawing at the sides of the box.
Hold on, buddy.
Sarah said, pulling open the flap. The kitten stumbled out, his movements clumsy but determined. He hobbled across the table, sniffing at her phone and scattering the papers she'd left there. Sarah watched him with a mix of amusement and sadness.
Well, you've had a rough day too, huh?
She said softly, stroking his head. His fur was softer now, freshly cleaned, and he leaned into her touch with a small, satisfied purr. After feeding the kitten some tuna from a can in her cupboard, Sarah got to work on the flyers. She printed out a dozen copies with a photo of the kitten she'd taken at the clinic, along with her phone number and the words "Found Kitten" in bold letters. As she taped the flyers to lampposts and bulletin boards around her neighborhood, she felt the weight of the day settle deeper into her chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, her mind replaying the events of the morning in an endless loop. By the time she returned to her apartment, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room. Sarah sank onto her couch, pulling her knees to her chest. The kitten limped over to her, his bandaged paw sticking out awkwardly, and climbed onto her lap. She stroked his fur absent-mindedly, staring at the wall. For the first time that day, the doubts came flooding in.
What if this was a mistake? What if I never get another chance like that interview? What if this is it?
She thought of the stack of rejection emails still sitting in her inbox, the dwindling balance in her bank account, and the student loan payments looming over her. She thought of all the sacrifices she'd made to get here, only to find herself right back at square one. The kitten let out a soft purr, his small body warm and comforting against her. Sarah sighed, leaning her head back against the couch.
I don't know what I'm doing.
She admitted aloud, her voice barely above a whisper.
I don't know.
The kitten nuzzled her hand, his purring growing louder. Sarah smiled faintly.
At least you're okay.
She said.
That's something.
And for now, it would have to be enough. The morning light filtered weakly through Sarah's apartment windows, casting pale streaks of sunshine over the cluttered coffee table. She sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, absently cradling a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The events of the previous day played on an endless loop in her mind, leaving her exhausted yet unable to rest. The kitten, whom she had started calling Pumpkin, for lack of a better name, was curled up in a corner of her worn throw blanket, fast asleep. His tiny chest rose and fell rhythmically, and Sarah couldn't help but smile despite her heavy heart. She reached out to brush a finger gently along his soft fur, marveling at how quickly he had settled into her space, like he belonged there. Her phone sat on the coffee table face down, a constant reminder of the opportunities she had missed. It had stayed silent all morning, save for a couple of texts from her best friend Jess, who had sent her encouraging words. "You did the right thing. Something better will come along." Sarah wanted to believe Jess was right, but doubt lingered like a dark cloud. She had spent months applying to jobs, enduring rejection after rejection, and Sterling Communications had felt like her last shot at making something of herself. Missing that interview wasn't just a setback, it felt like the end of the road. She sighed, picking up the now lukewarm tea and taking a small sip, trying to shake off the weight pressing down on her. Suddenly her phone buzzed, the vibration rattling against the glass surface of the coffee table. Startled, she grabbed it, her heart skipping a beat. An unknown number flashed on the screen. For a moment she hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. It could be spam, she thought, or maybe another recruiter calling to tell her she wasn't the right fit. But something compelled her to answer.
Hello?
She said, her voice tentative.
Hi, is this Sarah Martinez?
The voice on the other end was warm, confident, and distinctly professional.
Yes, this is Sarah.
She replied, sitting up a little straighter.
Who's calling?
This is Alexandra Sterling.
The voice said, and for a moment Sarah thought she had misheard.
Excuse me?
She stammered, her mind racing.
Alexandra Sterling.
The woman repeated, her tone as polished as the name itself.
I'm the CEO of Sterling Communications.
Sarah's grip tightened on the phone, her heart pounding. Why is she calling me? She wondered. The immediate possibilities flitted through her mind. Had the company realized she missed the interview and decided to give her a second chance? Was this some cruel joke?
I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time.
Alexandra said, her tone warm and sincere.
I wanted to thank you personally for rescuing my cat.
Sarah blinked, confused.
Your cat?
Yes, Leo.
Alexandra replied, a light chuckle in her voice.
He escaped through an open window yesterday morning. I was frantic. And then I saw your flyer.
Realization hit Sarah like a wave. The kitten was Alexandra Sterling's cat.
Oh, wow.
Sarah stammered.
I didn't know he was yours. I just found him limping and couldn't leave him there.
And I'm so grateful you didn't.
Alexandra said, her voice filled with relief.
Leo means the world to me. It's rare to find someone so compassionate.
Sarah blushed, recalling how she'd knelt in her best suit in the middle of the street, her missed interview now seeming insignificant.
It was nothing, really.
It wasn't nothing.
Alexandra countered.
You sacrificed your time to help him. That's admirable.
Sarah didn't know how to respond. Her heart raced as she processed the conversation.
I'd love to meet you in person.
Alexandra said. Sarah nearly dropped the phone.
Meet me?
Yes, to thank you properly. You went above and beyond for him. Can we meet later today at my place? I'll give you the details.
Sarah's mind raced. She glanced around her apartment. Scattered papers, unwashed dishes, a stack of laundry she hadn't folded. The idea of Alexandra Sterling stepping into her cramped, chaotic space was mortifying.
Yes, sure.
She answered, her voice still shaky.
Let's say 2 p.m.
Alexandra said warmly.
That works.
Sarah replied, her nerves still buzzing.
Great. I'll see you then. And Sarah?
Yes?
Thank you again for everything.
The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in disbelief. She placed it slowly on the table, her mind whirling. Alexandra Sterling wanted to meet her.
Leo.
She said aloud, glancing at the kitten, who stirred slightly at the sound of his name.
What have you gotten me into?
The kitten responded with a sleepy meow, stretching out his tiny paw before settling back into his nap. Sarah leaned back on the couch, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement, anxiety, and disbelief. For the first time in what felt like forever, a glimmer of hope pierced through the clouds of self-doubt. She didn't know what the meeting would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. Her choice to help that kitten had already changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. At precisely 2 p.m., Sarah stood outside Alexandra Sterling's upscale apartment building, clutching the small pet carrier that held Leo. Her palms were sweaty despite the cold January breeze, and her breath puffed in visible clouds as she craned her neck to take in the towering building. It was an elegant high-rise with mirrored glass windows and a sleek lobby that radiated wealth and power. Sarah felt a pang of self-consciousness as she smoothed her coat and adjusted the scarf she had hastily grabbed to look a little more put together. A uniformed doorman stepped forward, his sharp gaze softening as he noticed the carrier.
You must be here for Ms. Sterling.
He said with a polite smile.
She's expecting you. Please, come in.
Inside, the lobby was a symphony of polished marble and soft lighting, the air faintly scented with something expensive and floral. Sarah followed the doorman to the elevator, her nerves multiplying with each passing second. She couldn't help but wonder how Alexandra Sterling, the CEO of one of the city's top marketing agencies, would perceive her, a nervous, out-of-work graduate carrying her beloved runaway cat. When the elevator doors opened to the penthouse floor, Sarah was greeted by Alexandra herself. She was exactly as Sarah had imagined her, poised and elegant, dressed in a tailored blazer and silk blouse, with her hair swept into a sleek bun. Her sharp features exuded confidence, but there was a warmth in her eyes as they flicked to the carrier.
Sarah,
Alexandra said, her voice smooth and welcoming as she stepped forward.
thank you so much for coming, and thank you for taking care of my Leo.
Before Sarah could respond, Alexandra bent down slightly to peer into the carrier.
Leo, my sweet boy.
She cooed, her formal demeanor melting away. She unlatched the door, and the kitten hesitated for only a moment before bounding into her arms, purring loudly as he nuzzled against her. Sarah smiled at the sight, her own nerves momentarily forgotten. It was clear how much Alexandra adored Leo, and the kitten's obvious affection for his owner made Sarah's efforts feel completely worth it.
I don't know how to thank you.
Alexandra said, looking up as she cradled Leo.
When he went missing, I was terrified. He's my companion, my family. I can't imagine what might have happened if you hadn't found him.
It was nothing, really.
Sarah said quickly, though she felt a blush creeping up her cheeks.
I just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Nothing.
Alexandra raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on her lips.
From what I've gathered, you didn't just find him. You went out of your way to make sure he was safe. Please come in. Let's talk.
The penthouse was as sophisticated as the building itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, and the decor was minimalist yet luxurious, with carefully chosen art pieces adorning the walls. Alexandra gestured for Sarah to sit on a plush cream sofa, while she placed Leo on a cushioned perch near the window. As they settled in, Alexandra turned her full attention to Sarah. Her gaze was sharp yet kind, as though she were assessing Sarah's very soul.
Tell me,
She began.
how did you come to find Leo?
Sarah hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the seam of her coat. But Alexandra's expression was open, encouraging, and so Sarah recounted the events of the previous day. She described spotting Leo limping under the parked car, her initial hesitation, and the moment she decided she couldn't leave him there. She spoke of rushing to the veterinary clinic, staying with Leo through the treatment, and even missing her interview. When she reached that part, she faltered, her voice dropping.
I was actually supposed to be interviewing at Sterling Communications yesterday.
She admitted, her cheeks burning with embarrassment.
It was my dream opportunity, and I missed it because I couldn't leave him behind.
For a moment, there was silence. Alexandra tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Sarah braced herself for a polite but dismissive response, perhaps even a lecture about responsibility. But instead, Alexandra's lips curved into a thoughtful smile.
You gave up an interview for Leo?
She asked softly.
Yes,
Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper.
I know it probably sounds foolish, but I couldn't live with myself if I had just walked away. He was so small and scared. I had to help him.
Alexandra leaned back, studying Sarah with renewed interest.
It doesn't sound foolish at all.
she said firmly.
In fact, it tells me everything I need to know about you.
Sarah blinked, taken aback.
What do you mean?
Alexandra set her hands on the armrest of her chair, her gaze unwavering.
I mean that you demonstrated empathy, responsibility, and courage, all qualities that are invaluable in this industry. Marketing isn't just about selling products, it's about connecting with people, understanding their needs, and making a difference. What you did for Leo speaks volumes about your character.
Sarah felt her throat tighten. For months, she had been trying to prove her worth to potential employers, crafting the perfect resumes and practicing rehearsed answers for interviews. Yet here she was being praised for an impulsive act of kindness.
I'm just glad he's okay.
She managed, her voice thick with emotion. Alexandra smiled again, her expression softening even further.
Well, I'm more than glad. I'm impressed.
She paused as though weighing her next words carefully.
Sarah,
She said finally.
I believe things happen for a reason, and I believe you and Leo crossed paths for a reason. I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you, something I think would be a perfect fit.
Sarah's eyes widened, her heart skipping a beat.
An opportunity?
She echoed. Alexandra nodded, a twinkle of excitement in her eyes.
Yes, but first, let's make sure Leo is fully settled. Then we'll talk.
As Alexandra turned her attention back to the kitten, Sarah felt a flicker of hope reignite in her chest. For the first time in days, the weight of her missed interview lifted slightly, replaced by the sense that perhaps her act of kindness had led her to something even greater. After a few moments of silence filled only with the soft purring of Leo as he curled up on the windowsill, Alexandra leaned forward, her tone shifting from casual to serious.
Sarah,
She began.
I'm not sure if you're aware, but at Sterling Communications, we value integrity and authenticity above all else. That's why I'm offering you a position in our cause marketing division.
Sarah blinked, her mind struggling to process the words.
Wait, what?
She stammered, her voice rising with disbelief.
A position?
Alexandra smiled, nodding.
Yes, you've demonstrated not just your ability to act with compassion, but your understanding of what truly matters. Our cause marketing division works with organizations that focus on social impact, animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and more. I think your perspective and values would fit perfectly with the work we do.
The weight of her words settled on Sarah, and a flood of emotions overtook her. Her heart raced, and she felt as if she were dreaming. This couldn't be real, she thought, her breath catching. Just yesterday, she had been at her lowest, wondering if she'd ever catch a break, and now she was being offered a career at one of the most respected firms in the city.
Are you sure?
Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
I mean, I missed the interview and I didn't even have the chance to explain myself properly.
I've seen all I need to see.
Alexandra replied firmly.
Your decision to help Leo, your willingness to put your career on hold for the right thing, those qualities matter more than anything else. At Sterling Communications, we believe in doing things for the right reasons, not just for the bottom line.
Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had spent months doubting herself, questioning whether her choices were ever good enough for a career in marketing. Now, Alexandra's words made her feel validated, like the choices she'd made, not just in her career, but in her life, had led her to the right place.
I don't even know what to say.
Sarah whispered, overwhelmed.
Say yes.
Alexandra said with a smile.
I want you on my team, Sarah. Let's make a real difference together.
Without another thought, Sarah nodded, her heart soaring.
Yes, I would love to.
Great.
Alexandra said, standing and extending her hand.
Welcome to Sterling Communications.
Sarah's first few months at Sterling Communications felt like a whirlwind of excitement and growth. She dove headfirst into the cause marketing division, working on campaigns that promoted animal welfare, environmental causes, and nonprofits making a difference in the world. It was everything Sarah had hoped for, a job that wasn't just about selling products, but about doing good, spreading awareness, and truly making an impact. Every day, she was inspired by the work she was doing, feeling a deep sense of purpose she had never experienced before. One of the most rewarding parts of her new role was the sense of camaraderie she had developed with her colleagues. And of course, there was Leo. He had become a fixture in her life, often accompanying Alexandra to the office or snuggling into Sarah's lap when she was working late on campaign pitches. His presence was a constant reminder of the serendipity that had brought Sarah here, and of the kindness that had shaped her future. As Sarah grew in her role, she found herself becoming more confident, not only in her work but in her ability to speak up for the causes she believed in. Alexandra had become more than just her boss. She was a mentor, offering guidance and encouragement when Sarah faced challenges. Their professional relationship blossomed, and Sarah often found herself seeking Alexandra's advice, grateful for her wisdom and support. In her quieter moments, when she wasn't in meetings or brainstorming sessions, Sarah would look at Leo, now a beloved office mascot, and think about how much had changed in such a short time. What had started as a spontaneous act of kindness had not only saved a kitten's life, but had also set Sarah on a path that aligned perfectly with her values. Every day she was more certain that this was where she was meant to be. As she sat in her office, staring out at the city skyline, she knew that the decision to follow her heart, no matter the cost, had been the best choice she'd ever made. As Sarah walked home from work, the evening sky painted in shades of gold and pink, she passed the same busy intersection where she had first found Leo. The honking cars, the rush of pedestrians, and the noise of the city felt strangely distant now. She paused for a moment, a soft smile tugging at her lips. This was the place where everything had changed. The busy street, the frantic rush to make her interview, and the unexpected sight of that tiny kitten. It had all felt like an impossible decision at the time. But now, with Leo safe at home and her career blossoming, Sarah realized how one simple act of kindness had altered her entire future. Her life had come full circle. She had found more than just a kitten. She had found her purpose, a job that aligned with her values, and a mentor who believed in her. As she continued walking, the weight of the day lifted from her shoulders. There was a lightness in her step, a newfound hope. She had learned that sometimes doing the right thing, even at a cost, leads to rewards greater than you could ever imagine. And with that thought, Sarah smiled even wider, ready for whatever came next.